Here's a fun thought. Your empire isn't conquered by an army, it's conquered by a cough. One sailor steps off a ship, sneezes into history, and suddenly your eternal civilization is speed-running collapse. Because ancient borders weren't just drawn by kings and generals, they were rewritten by microbes riding trade routes like free public transport. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the moments when disease didn't just kill people, it shifted borders, collapsed dynasties, rerouted trade, emptied cities, and made empires smaller. Welcome to History by Nature, where geography, weather, and microbes quietly run the world. How diseases rewrote the maps of ancient civilizations. The big idea: disease is a map maker. When we hear plague, we imagine tragedy, and that's true. But zoom out, and disease does something else too. It changes where people live, who controls land, which cities matter, and which armies can even stand up. Because maps are really just the shadow of three things: population, who's alive and where; power, who can tax, recruit, and govern; trade, who controls movement; and disease hits all three like a wrecking ball. So let's watch the map start to move. Act 1. When empires imported their own disaster story. 1. The Hittite cough that wouldn't stop. Let's start with a brutal irony. Sometimes empires won a war and brought home the thing that destroyed them. In the late Bronze Age, the Hittites were a superpower in Anatolia. Big armies, big kings, we are definitely the main character energy. Then one campaign goes sideways in the most ancient way possible: captives. Prisoners of war are marched back into Hittite territory, except the prisoners arrive with an invisible passenger. An epidemic spreads. And it doesn't just hit the poor, it hits the throne. Ancient texts describe a plague that lasts years, even decades, and kills leaders, disrupts society, and gnaws at stability from the inside. Imagine building an empire for decades, and your legacy becomes, congratulations, you imported the apocalypse. Now, disease didn't single-handedly collapse the Bronze Age world. That era was a domino chain: climate stress, migrations, wars, system overload. But disease is the kind of factor that makes dominoes fall faster. And soon, the Mediterranean is about to learn the same lesson again. Act 2. The city that got too crowded to survive. Story 2. Athens. When the walls became a trap. Athens had walls. A navy. Money. Confidence. And during the Peloponnesian War, Athens makes a strategic choice: pull people inside the city walls for protection. Which is smart, unless you accidentally turn your city into a human storage container. Then, through the port, through the one place everything must pass, an epidemic arrives. Athens is hit by what we now call the Plague of Athens, 430 BCE. The death toll is estimated in the tens of thousands, potentially around a quarter of the population. And here's the part that rewrites maps. This isn't just loss, it's state failure. The workforce collapses, public order fractures, military capacity shrinks, leadership is shaken. Even the identity of the disease is debated. Scholars have proposed everything from typhoid-like illness to viral hemorrhagic fevers because ancient descriptions are messy and biology doesn't leave perfect receipts. But the impact, that's not debated. Athens survives, yet Athens is changed. And the war's balance shifts. So if you're wondering how diseases rewrite maps, sometimes they don't erase a civilization. They just take away the margin of error. And Rome is about to lose its margin of error on a scale that makes Athens look like a warm-up. Act 3. Rome, the empire built on roads and a pathogen that used them. Story 3. The Antonine Plague, when the empire's highways betrayed it. The Roman Empire was a masterpiece of movement. Roads, ports, armies rotating across provinces, trade spanning continents, which is great for commerce, and also great if you're a disease looking for a world tour. Around the late 160 SCE, an outbreak spreads through the empire, often called the Antonine Plague. Ancient writers describe symptoms consistent with diseases like smallpox or measles, but there's no definitive genetic identification. Estimates vary, but many place deaths in the millions. Here's how a plague redraws a Roman map, without conquering a single city. Fewer workers, less food, unstable prices, fewer soldiers, weaker frontiers, less tax revenue, less state capacity, more fear, more scapegoating and unrest. Rome doesn't instantly collapse, but it becomes less Roman, less able to project power everywhere at once. And just in case the empire thought it learned its lesson, history hits replay. The Plague of Cyprian, crisis on top of crisis. In the mid-3 RD century CE, another major epidemic, often called the Plague of Cyprian, strikes during a period already known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. Cause unknown. Impact? Brutal. Ancient reports describe severe mortality and manpower shortages that stress food production and the army, exactly the systems an empire depends on. And that's the map rewrite. When disease collides with political instability, you don't just lose people. You lose coordination. You lose trust. You lose control. Slow burn map. Rewrite, malaria and the geography of weakness. Not all map changes come from dramatic plague years. Some come from diseases that quietly make land less usable. Malaria became endemic in parts of Italy, including areas around Rome, shaping settlement patterns and making certain landscapes riskier to farm and inhabit over the long run. Not exactly a Hollywood collapse, but it's still a geographic rewrite. The land is the same. The human map on top of it isn't. Now let's jump east, because while Rome is struggling, China is about to prove that disease doesn't care what language your empire speaks. Act 4. China, epidemics, faith, and the breaking of a dynasty story. 4. Late Han, when epidemics fuel revolt. In the late Eastern Han period, historical records describe repeated outbreaks of disease across the 2nd century CE, clusters of epidemics that coincide with rising social stress. And in that pressure cooker, a massive religious political movement rises, the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Some sources even note disease outbreaks in the years leading up to and during this upheaval. Again, disease isn't the only cause, but it destabilizes society in a very specific way. When people feel abandoned, when institutions fail, movements grow. New loyalties form. Old legitimacy cracks. And then, the map changes. Not because a foreign army arrived, but because the state's grip loosened from the inside. Now, for the final act, let's go back to the Mediterranean, where one outbreak becomes a historical earthquake. Act 5. The plague that shook late antiquity story. 5. The Justinianic plague, confirmed killer, massive consequences. In the 6th century CE, the Byzantine Empire is in restore Rome mode. Justinian's reign is ambitious, reconquests, grand projects, big imperial energy. And then the plague arrives. The Justinianic plague erupts in waves, spreading through the Mediterranean world along trade and supply routes, the same arteries that kept the empire alive. And unlike some earlier outbreaks, modern research has identified Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind bubonic plague, as the cause, supported by ancient DNA evidence. The empire doesn't vanish overnight, but long, repeated outbreaks can do something uniquely destructive. They stop recovery. It's not just the first hit, it's the second, the third, the return season, the we can't rebuild because the workforce keeps collapsing problem. Remember the sailor cough at the beginning? This is what that cough becomes when it meets a connected world. The pattern. How disease actually rewrites maps. So what's the mechanism? How does disease go from tragedy to new borders? Here's the pattern. 1. Cities shrink or shift. People flee, die, or reorganize. Some cities lose relevance, others gain it. 2. Armies weaken, fewer recruits, lower morale, stalled campaigns. 3. Tax systems crack, less revenue, less administration, less control over distant regions. 4. Trade reroutes, ports get avoided, caravans break, supply lines snap, new hubs emerge. 5. Belief systems and legitimacy mutate. When institutions fail, people search for new explanations and new leaders. Disease doesn't just kill people. It changes what's possible. And what's possible is basically what maps are made of. The ancient world looked solid on parchment. but underneath it was always fragile, connected by ships, roads, and crowded cities. And microbes used those connections like shortcuts. So the next time you see a map of an ancient empire at its peak, don't just ask, who conquered what? Ask the darker question, what was already spreading inside it? Because history isn't only written by victors, sometimes it's rewritten by a fever. If you want a part 2, we can go even deeper into how disease reshaped Egypt's power networks, the steppe routes, and the earliest globalization of the ancient world. Subscribe for more History by Nature.